Welcome to This Birding Life, a podcast for birdwatchers everywhere. I'm your host, Bill Thompson III. Special thanks to our podcast host, Birdwatchers Digest, the magazine for birders who love to read and readers who love to bird. You can learn more about North America's favorite birding magazine and sample our latest issue by visiting our website at birdwatchersdigest.com. This Birding Life would not be possible without the wonderful financial support of our two corporate sponsors, Carl Zeiss Sports Optics and Rock Jumper Birding Tours. Carl Zeiss Sports Optics are the makers of the amazing Victory SF binocular, the very first binocular made specifically for birders. You can join the Zeiss community of birders on Facebook at facebook.com/ZeissBirding. Zeiss has sponsored This Birding Life for many years now, and we appreciate their support of us and of the birding and bird conservation communities at large. Zeiss, we make it visible. Rock Jumper Birding Tours offers more than 300 tours annually to more than 100 destinations worldwide, using talented guides from among their large staff, plus local birding guides whenever possible. Their commitment to offering a high-quality birding experience is why Rock Jumper enjoys such loyalty among its customers. Plan your next great birding adventure at rockjumperbirding.com. Now on to our episode. Author-artist Julie Zickefoose has spent her entire life out in the natural world. When she's not out in the field ambling from one amazing moment to the next, she's inside writing about or illustrating some article or book about the natural world, and birds in particular. From her early days as a young girl in Richmond, Virginia, Julie has been drawn to birds and nature. While her peers were immersed in things like school sports or going to the pool in the summertime, Julie was wandering in the woods and fields, soaking up new discoveries. Soon she felt compelled to try to draw the birds and animals she was seeing in an effort to know them better. Julie studied biology and anthropology at Harvard University and spent years as a field biologist, both during and after college. Her work with least terns and piping plovers during a stint with the Nature Conservancy in Connecticut resulted in protection protocols and public outreach techniques that are still in use today. She first noticed Birdwatchers Digest on a newsstand in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and decided to submit some work to the magazine. This would lead to her writing hundreds of articles and painting more than 27 covers for the magazine. It would also introduce her to her future husband, Bill. That's me. Flash forward to today, when Julie is one of the best-known names in the bird realm and the author of 3 best-selling books, all of which are illustrated with her beautiful watercolor paintings and pencil field sketches. Over the years, she's built a huge audience of followers through her columns in Birdwatchers Digest, a long stint as a commentator for National Public Radio's All Things Considered, and through her hugely popular blog. Julie's most recent book is Baby Birds, An Artist Looks into the Nest. Its chapters follow the development through Julie's words and art of 17 species of bird, from egg to fledging. There's never been a book like this, and the early reviews are basically awestruck raves. In this episode, I have a couple of conversations with Julie just as the book was coming out in late April. Both conversations were held outdoors at our farm in southeastern Ohio. Here's my chat with Julie Zickefoose. Welcome to This Birding Life. We're starting this episode off outside with this month's victim, Julie Zickefoose, author, naturalist, artist, gentlewoman farmer,
brush
clipper. We're out in the orchard that's to the west of our house. And in full disclosure mode, I need to say that Julie Zickefoose, I'm Mr. Zickefoose. I'm married to Julie Zickefoose, and we've done podcasts before. I think we did the very first one I did, and up on a temple in Tikal with Jeff Gordon. That was my first podcast episode. So welcome back to This Birding Life once again, Julie Zickefoose.
Well, it's so nice to be here, Mr. Zickefoose.
Yeah, I didn't change my name when we got married. Neither did you. So, Julie, you've just come out with your third book, Baby Birds, and we're going to talk about that a lot. But I want to start off the podcast before we get into the meat and taters about the book with a discovery that you may or may not have made today when we were checking nest boxes.
Well, we have a saying here in Southeast Ohio, I'm all ate up, about we just opened a nest box that's quite decrepit, and it's an old wooden nest box. It has a lid problem. The front door falls in every now and then, and it was originally made for chickadees. I think a downy woodpecker enlarged the hole at some point. And in that box is a full nest of about 6 inches of moss, but on top of that moss is deer and rabbit hair and plant fiber. And the thing that's got me all ate up is that the top layer is not very well organized.
Right, like chickadees, they're very fastidious.
Chickadees are type A birds, and they like everything tucked in. The fact that this top layer is disorganized makes me wonder if this could be the white-breasted nuthatch nest that I've been lusting after for 50 years.
Right.
Because when I was about 7 or 8, we found a
20 years
white-breasted we found a white-breasted nuthatch nest in our backyard in Richmond, Virginia. And we watched those babies grow up. And
Was
I
it in
will
the tree cavity?
never forget that. No, it was in one of the boxes my father put up in our backyard. Talk about formative. And the amazing thing about that nest is that it was made up entirely of peeled cigarette filters from our neighbor, Joe, who worked for Philip Morris, and who was given a case of cigarettes every week for free for being an employee.
But you had to smoke them all to get another case.
Oh, and he did. And he dumped his ashtray out on his driveway every day. And we actually knew what time it was because we could hear Joe coughing.
Right.
And, very sad story, and of course doesn't end well for Joe. But this nuthatch made its nest completely out of cigarette filters. And my father, being the creative mind that he was, said, well, those are loaded with nicotine, and that's the best insecticide you got. Were there any lice in the nest, Julie? And I said, no, sir, there weren't. So the science chimp thing goes way back.
Because those baby nuthatches were addicted from life.
They were nicotine
They
babies.
got jobs at Philip Morris later, and
They were jittery.
one's name was Winston, one's name was Chesterfield. Okay, so what else are we hearing right now around us here? It's an early spring morning.
And the sun is coming in our ears, and it's a titmouse palooza out here. They're towies. There was a gunshot, which is how you know you're in Southeast Ohio. And it's
America.
a Saturday, yeah. Right. More on Sunday. Actually, they're declaring it more on Sunday.
Oh, gee whiz.
Oh, that's terrible.
Love thy neighbor.
Awful.
Thrasher, blue-gray gnatcatcher,
Downy woodpecker drumming.
pileated woodpecker.
Yep. Carolina chickadees.
We also had pileated woodpecker, too.
Yeah. They're hard to tell apart.
What else?
Cowbirds. That's probably a red belly drumming. Oh, there was a towie's tee-wee. That's the hiding call. Yeah, it's a good morning.
Up near the house, there's white-throated sparrow. Chipping sparrow, there's a turkey in the distance. Gobbling.
But enough about birds.
Right.
My book.
Right. Well, we'll step into the studio and continue this conversation. What's the total number of species that we've recorded here on the farm?
I think we're at 194.
Okay. And what was the last one added?
You had to ask.
Pacific slope flycatcher.
Oh, right. I was
Excuse
thinking
me.
it was my Wilson snipe that I got.
Or your Virginia rail.
Yeah.
Okay.
We have had some good birds, but Pacific slope flycatcher, which incidentally Bill Thompson III found.
Well, the people who've listened to the podcast, they've heard the
They know that?
couple of episodes.
Your fans
on
know that.
Yeah. They want a female towhee to a nest, I think.
Oh, that would be early, but yeah, could be.
Okay. So we'll continue this in the studio in just a bit. Let's head back up to the...
I need to clip this multiple.
Okay. Here's where things get a bit interesting. A few days later, Julie and I were set to finish the interview in our basement music room / recording studio. I was readying the mics and headphones when I flipped a switch to power on and heard a loud crack. I saw a small wisp of smoke come from my laptop. Then I smelled burned wire. I'd fried my laptop. This postponed our recording for a few days while the laptop got repaired. With very little data loss thanks to a backup, fortunately, In the meantime, the weather improved and lots more birds arrived on the farm, so the remainder of the podcast was recorded outside, not in the studio. Somehow this seems appropriate, given the subject matter. We're here to talk about your latest book, Julie, Baby Birds, An Artist Looks into the Nest. Let's give everybody right here at the beginning of the podcast a quick little roundup of what this book is, because if you just think of it, Baby Birds, you might not know from the title what actually is inside the covers of that book.
Well, to start off, this is a big book. It's 9 1/4 by 10 1/2. It weighs 4 pounds, 3.5 pounds, and it's full of color illustrations, more than 500 individual studies of baby birds from hatching to fledging. And along with that, each species of the 17 covered gets its own chapter, and there will be a story that goes along with it. It's a story of my working with the birds or some interesting aspects of their natural history that I'd like to impart.
Now that we've gotten that little synopsis out of the way, let's get a little background on you. Where are you from? How did you arrive at this place? How did you first notice nature?
Well, I was raised by parents who were tuned into nature. My father was a farm boy from Iowa, and he knew a lot about a lot of things, everything from history and physics and math to what a shrike's nest might look like or whether an owl has a gizzard. And so I got a great start that way. He taught me a lot about everything, and my mom did too. And from there, I just decided when I was about 8 that birds were the thing. And I was raised in Richmond, Virginia, in the suburbs, and I would go out on my own in a little 5-acre patch of woodland behind the house and just bird watch with some old rotten binoculars of my dad's. And I didn't even know that bird watching was a thing. I just was drawn to them. One of the spark birds was a blue-winged warbler I saw bathing, and the other there was a little flock of yellow-rumped warblers that landed and were hopping around on the ground on our newly turned garden in February.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, these are incredible.
Right.
You know, I didn't know anything like this existed, and that's really what set the hook at about age 8.
And then were you driven to look in a field guide or a book and figure out what those birds were?
Yes, my parents gave me Song and Garden Birds of Eastern North America, National Geographic book, and that and Birds of Eastern and Central North America, Life Histories was a book by Forbush and May.
Mm-hmm.
And it was an old book, but it had these beautiful Louis Fuertes plates, and that's what made me want to be a bird painter.
Yeah, and so Fuertes was an early influence. Who were some of your other artistic influences?
Fuertes was huge. It was really the only bird painter I wanted to look at for many years because I had this sort of tunnel vision of a kid, you know. But I really hadn't seen anybody that good. And then later on in life, I met Bob Clem, who was a wonderful painter of habitat and birds in habitat, as well as birds themselves. He was incredible. You know, look up bird painter in the dictionary, and you see Bob Clem. And he gave me a lot of nice materials that he said he wasn't using that I could work on good watercolor paper. And he also guided me. He told me I should be drawing from life, and I took him seriously. So that was a very fortuitous thing in my early 20s to meet him.
And so you kind of connected that direct experience with a bird in nature with your artistic desire to recreate that moment or convey that moment, or?
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, I capture it somehow, you know, and just, I guess, possess it a little bit, you know, this fleeting thing. And thank goodness I got started the right way, you know, working from living birds, because that's made all the difference. And that really fed into this whole project, which the whole point of is to be in the presence of this squirming baby bird and do what you can to draw it very quickly and then get it back in the nest.
So your first couple of books, Letters from Eden and The Bluebird Effect, both of which did very well and got lots of acclaim. Those were more, I would say, experiential in nature, in that you were illustrating stories of experiences you'd had. Whereas this book seems to be more of a linear kind of a, you're following a specific bird from egg to fledging. How was the process different for you?
Process was quite different. I think that for both Letters from Eden and The Bluebird Effect, the writing was sort of dominant, and then as you pointed out, the illustrations were secondary to it, although very, very important. I mean, they're both loaded with illustrations.
Right.
This one, from the very beginning, I wanted to be illustration driven. So the text sort of supports and surrounds the illustrations, which are the whole point.
Right. And do you have a preference for one or the other? I think I know what your answer might be, but
not really. Actually, I mean, it's great to do both. I do confess that I'm really yearning to get back to the essay form. I've been immersed in this book for a very long time, and the last couple of years have really been given over to launching it, and now I'm really ready to start turning inward and cocooning a bit and thinking a lot and making those essays that I then love to illustrate.
Like waiting for Inspirato to hit.
Well, I've got a million things I want to write about.
Yeah.
And I have all these random notes sort of gathered up, and I'm just dying to sink my teeth into that. But right now, life is sort of in a blender getting the book launched, and it's not going to happen for a little while.
So, just for any folks out there who might be aspiring artists or writers, or I mean, you're kind of the triple threat in that, you have the knowledge of a field biologist or a field scientist, really, and then you can write about things clearly from both an emotive and a scientific perspective. But then you can also illustrate your own work, which is not something that very many people have done. Who are some of the other, in history, some of the other folks? I mean, Audubon.
Yeah, Audubon was a great writer, very colorful writer, and obviously an incredible draftsman and painter.
Do you feel you're in that tradition?
I'd say so.
Other than the killing of birds part?
Yeah, nailing them onto a board. Yeah, I'd say so, very much so. But, at this point, the writer who illustrates their own work is a dying breed and a vanishing thing.
Why do you think that is?
I think it's expensive to produce books like this,
right.
And there aren't a lot of publishers who are willing to put the immense amount of money and time and work into making this incredible book like Houghton Mifflin Harcourt did, and I'm very, very grateful for that. But those have been my biggest influences are the Ernest Thompson Seton, who illustrated his own wild animal stories. Wild Animals I Have Known was a formative book for me. Will James was a cowboy writer. He was originally a French-Canadian. He moved to the American West, styled himself a cowboy, and started drawing broncs and riders, and just incredible, great writer and a beautiful, beautiful painter and draftsman.
So for listeners out there who maybe know your name, probably know your name and know your work and have followed you on your blog over the years, one of the most prolific bloggers I know, what are some tips that you can share for folks who might want to get into this sort of illustrated nature journal sort of milieu that that you live in every day?
I would say probably my best advice would be to get out there every day, a little bit or a lot, as much as you can, as much as your life permits you to be outside, Take something to write on and write down what you're observing. And if you want to start drawing, start with plants and bugs, because you can make them sit still for you a lot of the time.
Right.
There's
you can train fleas for the circus.
Maybe you can.
Right.
I haven't done it recently. I'm rusty, but just start small. Start with things that aren't going to move too much, and flowers and plants and botanical studies, and work your way up to the things that jump around a lot, like birds and animals.
And you're pretty much self-taught as an artist, aren't you?
I wouldn't say that. I continue to be in touch with Will Ryman, who was my drawing professor at Harvard, and he is a great influence on me and continues to be a very versatile artist, and I was taught a great deal about the mechanics of drawing. I'd been drawing for years, but I didn't really know how to articulate what I needed to be doing, and he really helped me give words to that and make my mind wrap around forms.
Do you find that when you're illustrating something or when you're drawing, because I know when we first met, you were doing a lot of field sketches. You were doing a lot of sketches in pencil on paper, just very loose, almost no wrist involved, just writing, drawing from the elbow or the shoulder or whatever. I don't know the mechanics of it, but when you're doing that, does doing it more make it more fluid and more successful?
Oh gosh,
in your
yes,
mind?
yeah.
So it's just like anything, playing an instrument or practice makes better.
Yeah, it really does, and I found that when I sit down to draw something, let's say I have an osprey nest in front of me, it takes me about 3 hours to get to the point where I feel conversant with those birds and like I'm doing something that's worth looking at. And so, it's a process. And one of my favorite sayings is just do it.
Yeah.
There's no substitute for actually putting yourself through the effort and sometimes agony of trying to produce a decent drawing, And draw fast, draw quick, give yourself a time limit. Just don't fool around. Just try and get that down on paper.
And then don't fuss over it. Right?
Yeah, don't worry a bad sketch right, Eric Enion said, and he's a great British life sketcher. And that is really true. If you have a sketch that's a little off, don't erase it and, just do another one.
You've come up in kind of an informal school of bird and nature artists who are all around your same age and have kind of, fascinating to me, have kind of veered off in almost like a starburst of directions. And you've been to artist gatherings with these people over the years. I would imagine that some of these folks are people that have influenced your work and have you've influenced theirs and so forth. Many of them are doing almost like gallery sort of painting now, and
Yes.
some are doing more illustration, some are doing what would be called more nature sort of fine art.
Yeah, it's very interesting. There's a really interesting cohort of artists. Larry Barth, the bird carver, who I just profiled in Birdwatcher's Digest, John Perry Baumlin, Robert Braunfield, Jim Coe, Mike DeGiorgio, Al Gilbert, Cindy House, Debbie Caspary, Sean Murtha, David Quinn, Barry Van Dusen, and the late Brenda Carter were sort of the core group of artists that we all sort of feed off each other's energy. And you're right. I mean, we all sort of started off as bird artists painting field guide plates.
Right.
And that's kind of the only thing there is to do when you're in college and you want to start painting birds. You do some field guide work, and some of us are still at it. Mike DeGiorgio is doing some amazing field guide plates for South American birds, working with Guy Tudor, the dean of bird painters. And then you have people like Cindy House, who's doing these amazing pastels of landscapes with tiny birds in them that are exactly right. Everything about where the bird is and what it's doing. Jim Coe is a plein air oil painter who places birds in landscapes and sometimes doesn't put birds in landscapes anymore. So we've all gone off in these neat directions, and it's really fun to get together. And the other thing that's happening is a lot of these folks are now working on books as well.
Oh, that's
Which
good.
is great, yeah. It's really exciting to me. That's what I want them all to do, is books.
Right. So back to your book. Of the 17 species that you profiled in Baby Birds, what was your favorite one to do, if there was one, and why? And what was the toughest one to do, and why?
That's a really good question. I really dug painting the indigo buntings because I knew the parents of the brood.
Right.
Piper, the little male bunting who sang on the farm bell right outside the bedroom window every morning at 5 a.m. I saw his wife, Mrs. Piper, gathering cocoa fiber from a
So they were
hanging
actually
basket.
married at some point?
Yeah, I officiated.
Okay, that's with a wedding bell and everything. Oh, nice.
Yeah, I threw rice. No, I threw birdseed.
Yeah, don't throw rice because they'll eat it and blow up. No, that's a myth.
Anyway, I knew the parents, and so to see their kids grow up and to paint that was just a huge thrill for me.
Yeah. And so that was your favorite. What was the toughest?
I can't say that was my favorite because the hummingbirds were such a trip. I mean,
Right.
to spend most of a summer raising 4 hummingbirds by hand and then to somehow paint them while you're at it. That was kind of bionic.
Right.
That was really fun.
I think the one I was most interested in many ways, was the cuckoo.
Yeah, well, the yellow-billed cuckoo is the last and weirdest chapter in the book, because yellow-billed cuckoos are probably the weirdest North American bird. They hide a lot of secrets.
Mm-hmm. Well, when I found that nest trimming some brush, and I saw the adult take off, and I heard some noise, and I immediately ran up to get you, because I thought it would just be cool to see, hoping that we hadn't disturbed them so much that the nest would fail.
Yeah. They're amazing birds.
So describe what happened after that.
Well, it was one of those moments where, you come tearing out of the underbrush saying, "Zick, zick, zick." And I always know it's something really good. He said, "I think I found a cuckoo nest." And so we went out there, and I had my little Olympus camera with me, and I put it on video. And I wasn't able to see into the nest, but I stuck the camera lens up to it and started making a video. And these things, black skin, long, stringy yellow down, stood up on their hind limbs and made a buzzing sound like a rattlesnake, and opened these enormous red maws dotted with white pearly protuberances, and waved their heads back and forth and went zzz. And it was just the most amazing thing.
Yeah, you wouldn't want to stick your hand in there without knowing what was there.
Yeah, it was just like listening to snakes,
Right.
and it was an incredible moment. But it was years before I actually painted them,
Right.
because I had to find photos of yellow-billed cuckoos in the nest, and to do that I turned to the Southern Sierra Research Station, to researchers who had been working with this bird, and very kindly loaned me their nestling pictures
Right.
to work from. I absolutely had to do cuckoos because they have such an amazing story.
Yeah.
They are out of the nest by day 7. The entire nesting cycle of a yellow-billed cuckoo, from the laying of the first egg to the fledging of the chick, is only 17 days.
So compared to, say,
Compared
a bluebird.
to a bluebird, which is in the nest after the egg hatches, a minimum of 17 days,
Right.
and more like 20.
Right.
And which incubates for 14 days.
Right.
So let's 34 days versus 17 for a cuckoo.
Right.
11 days of incubation, 7 days of sitting in the nest.
Right.
Crazy.
For those listeners who are familiar with nesting birds and the notion of nesting birds, and by the way, that's a tufted titmouse that's
Isn't it, though?
dominating our recording right now. Explain how, because we've been taught not to mess with bird nests, because, when I was a kid, the mother will smell, which we know is not true, because songbirds don't really have a well-defined, developed sense of smell.
Well, finish the thought. The mother will smell you on the baby and desert it.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
no longer care for it.
But really, what's more likely is a mammalian predator, or a snake, I suppose, will follow your scent trail to the nest and eat the nest and eat the eggs or the young or whatever. So how did you manage to not doom every nest of birds that you were illustrating for this book?
For the first part of the book, I worked only with cavity nesting birds, which were nesting in my nest boxes. So I could protect them with a 2-foot section of stovepipe baffle.
Below the nest box.
Underneath the nest box, on the metal pole on which the box was mounted. So I was absolutely sure nothing was going to get up to that nest.
Right.
So I felt free to work with the birds.
Right.
Later on, I devised clever ways to take a quick snapshot of the nest contents in very well protected nests of cardinal and indigo bunting. I would just come up, point the camera at the nest, take a snap, walk away, and
Without touching any vegetation.
exactly. And I was on cement sidewalks in both
Right,
cases,
right.
so that worked great. That right here by the house.
Right.
But like for instance, I drooled over a field sparrow nest that I found, but the second I found it, backed away and never touched anything, and 2 days later it had been predated.
Right.
So an open cup nester is extremely vulnerable
Right.
to predation, and your going up and peeking in the nest is very likely to lead predators to it.
Right. I mean, we all stumble upon nests occasionally,
Sure.
unknowingly, but to go back and visit it or to reach down and pull the vegetation away is leaving
Yeah.
kind of a bionic scent trail that,
Yeah. You don't want to do that.
right. So,
And in other cases, I hand raise the birds.
right.
Hummingbirds, chimney swifts, phoebes, and mourning dove I hand raised. So that very much informed,
Right.
my work. And in the case of the chimney swifts, I got a very complete record of their development because I hand raised them from day
Right.
5. So, I could paint them well after they were flying.
Right.
So that was awesome. Same with the bluebirds. I hand raised 3 bluebirds.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, there's a variety of things that come to bear in producing this book, and all of them are very labor intensive.
Sure. Of course. I think that's what makes this book special is that anyone who opens the pages can go in there and go, wait, she did what? Like, I can't even imagine that, I mean, like, I think that's, I mean, I've been here present for much of this, and I still can't believe it. I'm still amazed at the amount of work that went into it. And how many years in total?
13 years.
Okay.
13 years. I wasn't working the whole time.
But who's counting?
Seasonal.
Right.
But also, as the project wore on, I sort of lusted after certain nests, and
Right.
and I would say, well, prothonotary warbler's a cavity nester. How do I get a prothonotary warbler? That kind of thing.
And there's probably some planning going on for Baby Birds Volume 2.
Well, brown thrasher is going to be the
Right.
cornerstone chapter because we were so fortunate to raise 3 last year. That was an incredible experience and a story I have yet to tell.
I want to go into the sort of fantasy realm here in just a second, but first, I want to firmly plant our feet on the ground and ask you to give advice to listeners for the podcast who find a baby bird. What should they do? Because that's going to be a question. That's a question that I get all the time at work at Birdwatchers Digest. I know you get it here.
Yeah.
And every person who's known as the bird person in their circle of friends gets that question. So give a basic rundown just to help people get on their way to figuring out what to do.
I found a baby bird.
Right.
Yes, to my surprise, Facebook has been a conduit for dozens and dozens of such messages when I thought the phone was plenty.
Right.
And so I do get asked this a lot. The first thing to ascertain, try to figure out what it is. A
Right.
lot of people who call me have no clue.
Well, I mean, baby birds are completely different
They can be
looking.
hard
and
to- yeah.
They can be, I mean, I've been a birder for 40 years, and I have trouble telling, is that a baby cardinal? Is it
Sure.
a baby sparrow? Is it a baby bunting? What,
And this is where the cell phone comes in real handy.
Right.
So the first thing I ask people to do is to snap a cell phone photo of it in good light and send that to me on my phone
Or to another,
or to a bird expert, although a lot of birders don't know their baby birds.
but
so-
or to a rehabber. And
Yeah, possibly, yeah. And first figure out what it is. Figure out if it is okay on its own. I mean, a lot of
Right.
baby birds fledge looking like they shouldn't be out of
Robins,
the
for
nest.
example.
Robins do. Indigo buntings just look
Carolina
like
wrens.
a wreck. And Carolina wrens are these tiny, stumpy-tailed things. So, it may look helpless, but it may actually be okay and be supposed to be out. Obviously, if there are cats around, get them inside. A lot of people have free-roaming cats that don't belong to them around, so there's that whole thing to deal with. Put the baby, if it can perch, up higher in a bush or shrub or, where its parents can find it. Watch to see from a distance if any tend it, and if they do, great. Just back off and,
Right.
let the parents do it. The best outcome is that the parent is caring for
Right.
it. If you're absolutely certain it's orphaned and nothing has come for 2 or 3 hours to feed it and it's cheeping miserably and in danger, Google your town and wildlife rehabilitator, or go to your state Department of Natural Resources website. They'll often have a listing, but you can usually find someone fairly nearby and start calling. A lot of these rehabbers are very, very busy, and you won't get a live person. You'll get a hotline or something like that. Leave messages, leave your number. In the meantime, A great emergency food for baby birds is scrambled egg. Surprisingly enough, a lot of people recoil and say, birds eat eggs?
Cannibals.
Yeah, but it's a great complete food, and that's a wonderful emergency food for almost any baby bird you could figure, you could find. Uh, they will sometimes gape and beg if you whistle softly, blow on them, just try anything, a rapid peeping sound, try anything. When they open, pop a little gob of egg in there. Don't be afraid to put too big a piece in. They can swallow really well. And push it well down into the mouth and they'll swallow. Probably best not to offer water because you can choke them that way, but egg has lots of moisture in it. So that's what you can feed them while you're waiting to hear back from somebody who's licensed to handle them. And keep them warm. You can get a jar of warm water and put them in like an igloo cooler with that and keep them at about 90 degrees. And that helps a lot to warm them up. If they're cold, they can't swallow.
Right. Okay. Well, that's very helpful. And are there websites of rehabbers is there a URL in particular?
I think that probably the I know there is an National Wildlife Rehabilitators Association,
Right.
NWRA, I believe, and
Okay.
a quick Google should get you to that.
You probably don't want to Google the NRA because that might.
Yeah, that might not be what you're after.
Right. Okay. All right. Well, that's very practical advice, and I'm sure a lot of people will be happy to have that. So I want to go into the fantasy realm now, and what would be your ideal day in nature if you could wake up tomorrow and have no responsibility for anything, and you could pick your perfect day in nature? What would it be?
Well, I just had a little taste of that because as we're recording this, it's April 18th, and the ephemeral wildflowers are out. And I took a quick drive down Duck Creek Road, which is one of my favorite roads to run, and found trillium by the hundreds and blue phlox, and the trout lilies are still out while the trillium's up, so it's a very unusual year. So my ideal day would be totally unstructured. I would take off with my best dog, Chet Baker, down a dirt road and just see what was growing and blooming and flying around.
So a couple of other questions here, Julie. The book, in its very nature, is so unique. It seems like something that no one's done before quite this way. I mean, Audubon and Wilson were some of the first people tracking birds, but they weren't following the entire life history of the birds. And, Bent followed the birds and created these life histories, and John Terrace later, and the Birds of North America project all follow the life history, but no one's following it and adding the visual steps along the way to fully inform and illuminate our knowledge about each of these bird species. Why do you think it is that this really hasn't been done before?
Well, that was a question I asked myself when I started it, because I started with bluebirds, which were obvious because I run like 30 boxes and have for decades. And I thought, oh, I've got this thing happening right under my nose, and why would I not paint that? And then from there, I went to Carolina wrens because they were nesting in a hanging basket right outside the door, and they were safe from snakes. And I thought, oh, well, I can paint Carolina wrens. And it kind of grew that way.
Yeah.
And so I think first off, you'd have to be living amongst birds. You'd have to be able to just pluck them out of a nest and walk into your house and paint. It'd be easy for you. So that was, at least for me, that was key. And then what kicks in then is that if you're going to keep this baby bird for 20 to 40 minutes away from its parents, you probably ought to know what to feed it.
Right.
And so it helps a lot to be a licensed wildlife rehabilitator, both in a legal sense and in a handling birds sense. It's definitely not something you want to do without knowing what you're doing.
Right.
And then you'd have to also be able to draw them quickly from life, which as they squirm and roll around. So when you think about those three parameters, that narrows the set of people who could possibly do this quite a bit.
Right.
So I think that's why it all sort of comes down. And I want to share a quote from a writer named Andre Gide, which I found recently and which really resonates with me. He said, Do not do what someone else could do as well as you. Do not say, do not write what someone else could say, could write as well as you. Care for nothing in yourself but what you feel exists nowhere else. And out of yourself, create impatiently or patiently the most irreplaceable of beings.
Wow.
Isn't that a cool quote?
It's a cool quote. Who is this?
Andre Gide. He was the openly gay author of Corydon.
Okay.
Yeah, and his birthday is November 22. And I thank the Writer's Almanac for that beautiful
Good to
quote.
know.
Yeah.
Good to know. This is kind of Margaret Morse Nice stuff, really.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. Who lived among song sparrows and said, I'm going to study
In
those
Columbus,
birds.
Ohio.
Right. And said, I know a lot about these birds, but I don't know much at all. You know,
Right.
and basically just followed birds around and got to know individuals and where their territories were and mapped them out. And nobody'd ever done that before, so why not?
And yet she was kind of debunked because she wasn't a man and she wasn't an ornithologist, a trained ornithologist, right?
At first, perhaps, but I think she was the first female elected fellow of the Wilson
Right.
Ornithological Society, and she really, was very, very well respected. But yeah, probably it was an uphill battle for her.
Initially.
Yeah.
Althea Sherman. Another one, Chimney
Swifts, again, living among the birds,
Right.
living with the birds. And the definitive nest study of yellow-billed cuckoos was done not very long ago, I think in the 70s, by a woman who set up a spotting scope in her house
Yeah.
and focused it on a yellow-billed cuckoo nest and found out stuff that nobody knew.
Yeah.
And that was just really, really cool. So that's the great thing about ornithology, is that it is a citizen science.
Well, it's a living, breathing.
Yes, and we can all contribute, because you might be seeing something that no one's ever seen. And I am looking here for her name. Shoot, probably won't find it.
Okay, well. Speaking of women and science, you have sometimes been pointed to as an example of a successful woman in birding, in what's considered by some to be kind of a male-dominated avocation or even vocation. And yet you kind of reject that label in a way. Tell everybody kind of why that is and what your thinking is on.
Okay. Well, first off, her name was Eloise Potter, and she
Okay.
did her study, I think, in 1979, and it was published in the Journal of Field Ornithology in 1980 under the title Notes on Nesting Yellow-billed Cuckoos.
Good.
Lovely. Well, as far as being singled out as a female in ornithology,
I mean, you got some advice on that early on in your career, right?
I did, and a wonderful mentor of mine was Roxy Layburn, who was about 4'10", and she spoke with a very heavy North Carolina drawl, and she was an amazing woman. And, or was it South Carolina? I'm worried about that. I might have it wrong. Anyway, Roxy was the world's foremost authority on feather structure. She could identify a bird from a fragment of its down, a microscopic fragment of its down. And so she was the person that the airlines all turned to when they had a bird-related downing of a aircraft, and she would tell them what had gotten sucked into the engine.
What brought the bird
Exactly.
plane down?
Exactly. But Roxy just knew so much, and she said to me when I was probably in 1986, quite a while ago, she said, "Don't worry about whether someone is respecting you or not because you're female. Just do the best you can, and you will eventually be noticed for your work." And that is something that I really took to heart. I just tried to be the best I could. And I am uncomfortable being asked to join shows of women artists or, present myself as a woman in ornithology, because I just feel like I'm just a painter. I'm just an ornithologist. I don't want people to make that distinction for me. And I think that comes directly from Roxy's advice, which is just put your head down and your nose to the grindstone and do the best work you can.
Yeah. Well, Julie Zickefoose, you certainly have done the best work that you can. I mean, this is a stunning achievement. It's getting great notice all over the place, and I think that's only the beginning. It's a fabulous, amazing accomplishment, and it's a book that I think will be cherished by thousands and thousands of readers all over the place, and I want to congratulate you on a fantastic accomplishment.
Well, thank you, Bill Thompson. And for my part, I'd like to thank Birdwatchers Digest for giving me my first and best audience. I wrote my first article for Birdwatchers Digest in 1986. I painted my first magazine cover for Birdwatchers Digest, now 27 later.
Wow.
I'm still painting covers for Birdwatchers Digest, and
The current covers you're painting.
Yeah, go figure.
From baby birds.
Yeah, I so appreciate the chance to reach such wonderful subscribers. It's really been great.
Well, it's been an honor to publish you all these years, and it's a fantastic thing to see all of your work and study and passion and love of nature come together in this fantastic vortex of, amazing insight. And I think anybody who has even a passing interest in birds or bird art or natural history and how it progresses in a species owes it to themselves to get their hands on Baby Birds by Julie Zickefoose.
Thank you, Bill.
To learn more about Julie Zickefoose, visit her website at juliezickefoose.com. That's JuliZickefoose.com. There you'll find links to her wonderful blog, a library of her original paintings, and opportunities to purchase any of the growing array of Zick products such as limited edition prints, note cards, puzzles, and even playing cards. And you can order a copy of any of her books personalized with an inscription from Julie. If you'd like, she'll even put a paw print in the book from our family dog, Chet Baker Boston Terrier, who is more famous than any of the rest of us put together. Special thanks to Julie for being our guest here on This Birding Life. If you see Julie in the future, please tell her you heard her on this episode. She doesn't believe anyone's going to listen to it. Thanks, too, to our fabulous sponsors. Carl Zeiss Sports Optics, creators of fine birding and outdoor optics. Connect with Zeiss at zeiss.com or at facebook.com/zeissbirding. Carl Zeiss. We make it visible. And thanks to Rock Jumper Birding Tours, which will take you anywhere in the world you want to go birding and show you a fabulous time. Plan your next great birding adventure at rockjumperbirding.com. Finally, thanks to Birdwatchers Digest for being my BFF since way back when. Join the BWD family by sampling our content, signing up for Birdwire, our free bi-weekly e-newsletter, buying one of our books or booklets, or birding products, or coming to one of our world-class birding events, including our Reader Rendezvous birding trips and the American Birding Expo, where we bring the entire world of birding to one place for you to check out. All of this and more is available to you at birdwatchersdigest.com. A great deal of this podcast was edited during the New River Birding Festival in May of 2016, and everybody there at the festival wanted to say hello, so here they are. So when I'm going to record you guys, if you'll just say...
You going to do video too?
I can't do video on the podcast. They don't like that. But if you guys would just say hello from New River and give a big cheer, I think that would be really good. So are you ready? Yeah. All right. 1, 2, 3.
Hello from New River! We don't need a take two.
Well, thanks for listening, everybody. Until next time, this is Bill Thompson III saying I will see you out there with the birds. Laters.